Hi, everyone. Again, this is Kyle. Thanks for attending part two, program and special effects. So last part, if you didn't catch it, it was programming special effects, but it focused on fog machines, cold spark, fire, all that type of stuff. And then this one is going to focus on moving heads. So in this one, I am going to go over moving heads. I'm using the 230 watt indoor moving heads from your Pixel store. My store, BF Light Shows, they have 8 of these moving heads in the layout, and then RGB Sequences has 4 of them. The only real downfall with using indoor heads is you do need the domes, but an advantage to using indoor versus outdoor is they do move faster. So I wanted to get some of the fastest moving heads available, so that's why I went with these. This picture was taken last night. I was just kind of playing with the prism effect. So the middle 2 have a prism effect, and the outer 2 I kind of played with the focus, and that's how I got the beam to be a little bit more narrow in the middle there. Just kind of playing with the focus on those, and then prism on the outer for the middle 2. So in this class, I'm going to go over how to set up moving heads in groups. The important ones that pretty much all the vendors that use groups are using, they use the pan, tilt, shutter, dimmer, and some of them use color. The less important ones, or ones that are used a little less often, are prism, rotation, speed, zoom, focus, frost, and gobo. X-Lights isn't able to show really any of those, so that's probably the main reason they are not used as often. You can absolutely see prism and rotation in person. Gobo, you can get some cool effects from as well, but those are all things that have to get done in person as opposed to through X-Lights, because X-Lights just doesn't have a way to generate a preview for that. So I'll show you some of the effects you can get with a gobo and prism and stuff in a few minutes. The heads I am using from your Pixel store, they are 16 channels. The configuration for them is listed right here if you want to take a screenshot, or if you're using these. If you get any of the sequences from BF Light Shows or RGB Sequences, you can also grab the model from either of those layouts. Here are the different groups that are set up to go along with the moving heads. So I'll explain how to do this in just a minute. But basically what it allows you to do is, if you have multiple moving heads, instead of adding an effect to each moving head, you can apply it to a group, and it will just make sequencing a little bit easier. It'll make importing a little bit easier, and you can get some better effects as opposed to trying to do everything manually from one head to the next. Good example of that is, like, if you wanted to do like a single strand kind of going back and forth, you could throw a single strand on dimmers, and it's going to bounce back and forth or from the middle, however you want. Trying to get the timing for that, doing moving head 1, moving head 2, moving head 3, etc., is going to be a lot more difficult than just dropping a single strand effect on a group. So one important thing to note when you are setting up these groups, they are basically just a string, but when you set up the string, you have to go down into string properties and set the string type to single color. So by default, it will not be single color. So make sure that you set that, or things will not render correctly. They will not output to the head correctly. You'll get all kinds of weird issues going on if you don't change that. And then this is just a slide of the color wheel. The moving head manual, it basically just tells you color 1 and color 2 for all these values, but it doesn't actually tell you what the colors are. So I went through, figured it out one color at a time on the colors that I think I may ever use, and then put them into the color wheel so X-Lights can display them correctly. Something to note, the environment plays a huge factor in how well moving heads show up. Red will very rarely show up. It's almost impossible to get it to show up as a beam. You may be able to see the light red, but you won't be able to see it as a beam unless you have fog or some crazy climate condition. Even when I was at Disney last year, they had all the fireworks and everything going off. You could barely see red. You could see it just on like the smoke of where the fireworks were, but that was it. And they're using multiple tens of thousands of dollars worth of moving heads, way more expensive than moving heads we're buying. So if they're struggling to pull it off, there's no hope for us. All right, so we'll do a demo. So I'm going to close the PowerPoint. Oops. Too many things in full screen. All right, so in Xlights, to set up a group, basically what you do is you grab a string, just come up here, drag out a string, and then you set the number of strings to the number of moving heads you have. So in my case right now, I have 4 set up behind me. So we would set this as 4. And then you want to assign them to a controller. And you're going to come down and say use start channel. And then over here where it says use start channel, click the 3 dots. It will give you a little window like this. You're going to say start of model and come to moving head 1. And then up here where it says start channel, you're going to pick whatever you're trying to control. So if we wanted it to be pan, for example, that is 10 on these particular moving heads. So we would say, okay. Right here, nodes per string, we are just going to leave that as 1. So now you see we have 4 dots. That represents the 4 moving heads. And they are starting at moving head 1. You want to then check this little box. And then you'll have to do some adjustments down here. So you're going to have it say individual start channels, and then you are going to basically set these to be moving head 1, channel 10, moving head 2, channel 10, moving head 3, channel 10, moving head 4, channel 10. And that channel is going to change depending on what your manual says and what group you're creating this for. Then you can rename this to be moving head pan. I already have one, so I'm not going to save that. But the last thing you want to do is come down to string properties and change this from RGB nodes and come over to single color. And then from there, after you have renamed it, you can save it. I typically throw these up kind of in the upper corner of the screen, just so they're up and out of the way. You don't need to really see them. I don't want them available in like the preview window or anything like that. But if you are zoomed out, if one of the moving head elements has an effect on it, you're going to get something that lights up. So maybe you accidentally put a DMX effect on Gobo or on Focus or something that you wouldn't normally know. This will give you some type of visual representation that, hey, there's data being sent to this channel. Go take a look. And then you have, moving head 1, 2, 3, and 4 for your controllers. What you're going to do is basically just drag moving head 1, 2, 3, and 4 if you're daisy chaining them. I have them connected to a F16 V4, and they are connected to the serial port. So that's all correct. And then on the moving head itself, there is a little screen. So there's a little screen right here. You want to make sure that this screen is set to the correct value. The correct address. So right here it says 33. This is moving head 4 or 3. I'm sorry. So this one is 1. This one is 16, 33, and 48. 49. Sorry. And then To get the lights to turn on, you have to use a lamp on function. These are not LED based. So to create a lamp on function, what you would do is look at your manual. I don't have the manual in here. So you would look at the manual and there is a lamp on function. So give me 1 second and I will pull that up. In these particular heads, it is channel 16 and it is a value of 255 for about 10 seconds or so. And that will kick on the lamps. So here is the manual. So lamp function right here, 224 through 255, turn lamp on, and it has to be at least 5 seconds. So what that means is you need to set a DMX value on channel 16 somewhere between 225 and 255 for 5 seconds or more, and then it'll turn those on. So to do that, we can come over to exploits, new sequence. For this, we can do an animation. We have moving head 1, 2, 3, and 4. I usually just do this for the full 30 seconds. It says 5 seconds, but just to make sure it kicks on. And then once I do it for the first one, I will just basically copy and paste that for all of them. And now we have a simple lamp on sequence. Once we do output to lights, after a few seconds, they will turn on. And they do take a minute or two to warm up. So even after they are on, you'll be able to see the light, but they're not at full brightness. Usually it takes probably 5 to 10 minutes for them to really warm up and to get to that brightness. So if you have a show that's kicking on, I would recommend running this animation a few minutes before your show is going to begin and not as like part of your first sequence or something like that. All right, so now that that is done, they should be on. And then to get them to work, what we would do is drop a on effect for the shutter. The shutter basically just allows the lamp to be on, and then the dimmer is what is going to turn them on and off. So the shutter you want to stay on for your whole sequence. Dimmer, if you want it to like pulse to the beat or flash and do those types of things, that's what you'll use the dimmer for. So let's do a pan. Then a couple of values to kind of be aware of. 43 equals 90 degrees. So if you start your moving heads facing the right, 43 would be pointing the crowd. If they are facing the left, 128 would be facing the crowd. So it just kind of depends how you set up your moving heads and whether they move clockwise or counterclockwise. Obviously, what I just said is backwards if it is if it's counterclockwise, that is for moving clockwise like these. Let's see. So I'm going to tilt real quick. Oh, so I threw these on channels 11, 12. I basically threw them on the wrong channel. So I need to go back over here and do that there. So now you can see that they're on. If you wanted to do some other effects, you know, we could play with a bars effect. You could do something like on and off. Now they're strobing, and you know that took only a couple of seconds to be able to get them to turn on and off and kind of flash like that. Another thing you could do is instead of using a DMX effect for the pan or the tilt, you can actually use other effects like bars or single strand. So as you have different values set here, they will control the moving heads with these different colors here. So now it's basically going back and forth, but instead of having to come up with a value curve and things like that in a DMX effect, a bars effect is handling that for you. So there's a ton of different ways that you can control a sequence and control the moving heads. I'm going to set up a gobo and we'll do a little demonstration with a few different things and different effects, and you guys can see what they look like. I'm also going to go over a few different ways to combat vendors that use different home points. Gil is currently working on an update that will hopefully fix that once and for all. But in the meantime, there's a few different ways that you can go in and adjust a starting point. So I will show that as well. And one of the advantages to doing groups like this is if you only wanted a couple of moving heads on at a time, like right now I only have the FAR 2, 3, and 4 on, 1 and 2 are off. If you double click on the group you created and then double click on strand, your node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, those represent the moving heads. So and then now if we want to play with a gobo, you can come over here and start to play with a gobo. As you start to play with this, it will, oops. So you can see it's starting to flash. Basically what that's doing is it's basically just going through the gobo wheel. So let me see if I can play with this a little bit. One thing with gobos is you have to kind of play with the focus as well. That's just a little too close to that card. So as you start to play with these, it will do different effects, and really kind of up to you what you think they look good. This would really only work if you're basically putting it on like a driveway or the sidewalk or something like that. Another cool effect is adding frost. So that basically just creates a wash, and we'll make sure that it's not, too bright or, anything like that. But so let me turn that off real quick. So when you're going to actually sequence moving heads, you want to keep in mind that they are a motor. It does take time for them to actually move. You are going to want to make sure you account for that amount of time. If you're in exploits and you come over to moving heads, we have ours set to a slew limit, which basically accounts for how fast they can move. So ours are set at 150 degrees a second. So in order to do 300 degrees, almost a circle, it would take 2 seconds. These heads can probably move a little bit faster than that, but to account for some of the slower moving heads, to account for the weatherproof domes and things like that, we try to make sure our moving heads are set accordingly, so that way other people will be able to use them. And then, so you have your tilt here. Because we're using a color wheel, if you wanted to get exploits to show you the color, what you can do is basically just drag an on effect onto your moving head up here. And then when you are actually using the sequence, so you can see moving head 4 is red. If you wanted to repeat this and make them different colors, you can make this one green, this one blue, that one yellow, and then they would actually show up. If you go ahead and try to turn them on, you can see they are in different colors. So that's kind of a quick way that Scott added for exploits to be able to show the color wheel. That is a manual process. There's a little disc that goes inside the color wheel that has to spin. So if you're trying to go from red to green to blue, if the color wheel goes from red to yellow to green to blue, it's going to skip over yellow and you will see that. So I would recommend, if you're trying to switch colors through the color wheel, to have your dimmer turn off and then back on. That way your color wheel will have time to do that rotation without you seeing the color change, because it really doesn't look that good when you do something like that. So I'm going to open up one of our sequences just to kind of show what one of our sequences would look like with these moving heads. So this is our sequence. This is Halloween from Marilyn Manson. And you can see in here we have effects on the dimmers. And then if you double click on the dimmers and double click on strand 1, you can see we have effects on the individual moving heads as well. And then if you come over here to double click on tilt and then strand, kind of the same thing. You have a bunch of different effects in here for all the different moving heads. Pan is the same way. Like I mentioned in the PowerPoint, the most critical ones that most vendors are using are tilt, pan, shutter, and dimmer. Some of them use color, some of them don't. Prism, Gobo, Frost, Focus, all those are probably a little less important since Exolites doesn't currently show them. But that might be something Gil's working on. He's been doing a lot of work to improve the moving head process for us. So can't wait for that to come out. Thank you, Gil. But we'll do a quick playback of this. I'm going to turn the audio off so we don't get yelled at in YouTube when this gets uploaded. So we'll do a quick render. I'm going to move this table back real quick and then I'll go ahead and play this. So as you can see, as the effects come on, Exolites will output that to your moving heads so you can kind of demo them, see what they're going to look like and things like that. I found that using kind of more slow motion or not as quick bouncing effects look a little bit better in person. It's very subjective, so it's really up to you and how you want to do it, but that's kind of what I found works the best. And then, like I mentioned, I wanted to go over some tips and tricks on if a vendor is using a different moving head layout or model. So let's go over that real quick. I'm going to turn these moving heads off real quick. To do that, same concept, you go to lamp off. The lamp off value is 165 for these. And then again, that's just in the manual. So after 10 seconds or so, 5 seconds, the value of 160 to 191 will turn them off. And then after they are turned off, you want to give it a little additional time. If you turn them off immediately, it's kind of like one of those projectors before they started going to LED or LCD. They have a bulb in there. If you immediately turn it off before it has time to cool down, it's going to shorten its life. And the bulbs are like $80 to $100 a piece, so you really don't want to burn those up prematurely. All right. All right, so here is the layout. You have the moving heads that are facing the right, and say yours are facing the left. So yours are 180 degrees, the opposite direction. What you could do is when you go to import a sequence, there's a few different ways you can do this. So right now they're all facing the right. If you needed them all to face the left, you could come in here, find your pan or tilt channel, depending on how you wanted to do it. And you could select the effects. And then what you can do is come down to the bottom where it says remap channels. And not only can you remap from channel to channel, but you can also create an offset. And what that offset will try to do is account for a variant. So if yours are to the right or to the left, you can put that offset in here. If you have a different moving head value and the effects are set up or sequenced on the moving head itself, you would probably need to use channel to channel unless they're the same moving head. So if you have a moving head from us and you need to adjust pan because your pan channel is 5, ours is 10. So what you would do is take map from channel 10, and that would be to channel 5. And then yours are facing the left. So you could do something like -86. 90 degrees is a value of 43. So 43 doubled is your 180. And now the pan is going to get reassigned to channel 5, and it is going to reverse that 180 degrees. And then you would click OK, render it, and that should get you close to a good example of where they should be facing. It isn't perfect because if the values are, maybe it's on kind of like a fan type of effect, number 8 or number 4, the outer one, is going to be opposite. So instead of fanning out, they would basically be fanning in towards each other. So then you would have to go through and adjust like the outers to the inners and basically do like a 180-degree flip there too. But that'll at least get you in the ballpark. You could have them facing the right direction and they would just be inverted. You can then play with this invert option over here, and that should get you really close to where they're supposed to be. There's a lot of trial and error with moving heads. That's one of the things that Gil's working on. So instead of using a DMX value, like right here where we're using 70, the new effect and the new model that he has been working on allows you to basically pick, hey, I want it pointing this direction. And then Xlights is going to be smart enough to calculate how to get to that position rather than us assigning it a specific value, which could be different for every person. So once that comes out, it should be backwards compatible, but most of the vendors will probably have to release some updates in order to take advantage of the new effect. But that should correct most of those types of issues. And then let's see. So to connect the moving heads to a controller, you need some type of DMX cable. We sell them on our website. You can also make them if you look up the pinouts. We sell a 6-foot cable. If you needed longer, you could either do an Ethernet to Ethernet coupler, or like I said, you could make your own. They plug into the DMX port on your controller. So the bottom port on the F16 V4 is for DMX. On a Genius controller, they are labeled DMX 1 and 2 over here. And then for Culp, they are 3-pin wires. So I don't have a picture of Culp, but this is Wally's. I'm pretty sure Culp is wired the same way. So they have the 3 pins. You have ground, and then DMX negative, DMX positive. And then again, that would just go over to your DMX fixture. And then from there, let's go back here. You're pretty much always daisy chaining moving heads. Typically, you wouldn't put a moving head on its own port. So you would come here, daisy chain them. But what you want to pay specific attention to is their DMX address, which is indicated by this little square parenthesis or bracket. So each one is 16 channels, starting at DMX address 1. And then this is 16 channels, starting at DMX address 17, 33, and 49. If you had more moving heads, obviously you'd just add an additional 16. But each of your moving heads, you have to set to that correct address. If these were all set at number 1, then they would all do what moving head 1 is doing, and it would not work correctly. When you go into your website for your controller, you would come over to your serial port, and you want to make sure that the protocol is set to DMX as opposed to Renard or LOR or serial or Pixel, depending on your controller. After you have done that, then Xlight should be able to communicate with your controller, and when you do output to lights or use your Raspberry Pi to control your show or your X schedule, everything should be working correctly. And then the last quick point I wanted to make is in regards to vendors that use a different number of moving heads. If like BF Light Shows uses 8, RGB Sequences uses 4. If you are only using 4 moving heads, RGB would work great. Say you're using 6, so you don't have 8, you don't have 4. How do you overcome that? What you can do is, if the sequence vendor has 8, obviously you can just skip importing 2 of them. But if they are only using 4, you can pick another set of effects from one of the nodes that's already created and then duplicate it. So typically, like, nodes 1 and 8 are mirrors of each other, so they're like opposite directions in most cases. So if you wanted to duplicate those, you could add number 1 and 8 to be the missing 2, or you could do like 4 and 5, something along those lines. So you want to do kind of like the pairs. So the outers, the middles, the second one's in, the third one's in, that type of thing. But that'll typically give you the best results. When I set up the 4th of July show, obviously we have 8 in our layout, but I only had 4 for the 4th of July show. And to do so, I basically took 1 and 8 and then 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are the middle 2. So those are going to give you your outward pointing and things like that. And then I grabbed the outer 2. That worked really well. I was really happy with it, and it really didn't take very many adjustments to get it looking right. So that's what I would recommend. If you guys have any questions, if you ever order our sequences and need help, feel free to send us a message on Facebook or email. We're happy to help. I've spent a bunch of time with a bunch of different customers, helping them map and get them working, make sure that they're happy with them and everything like that. Obviously, we won't be able to readjust every single effect for you for every sequence, but we can at least point you in the direction. We can help you get them going, show you how to do it, and give you tips where we can get you in the ballpark. If it's good enough, you could be happy. If not, we can show you how to manually adjust them. So, but we're almost at time where we have to stop and go for questions. So I will hold up here for a minute and see if anyone's got some questions.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, what about cables for waterproof DMX that have the similar like pigtail connections? There's a lot of moving heads that have that standard.
Yes. So I don't carry those cables. I am looking into getting them. I'm trying to figure out which vendors moving heads, if any of those cables have a different connector on the outside. The domes come with them. So I have the domes from your Pixel store. Those already come with those weatherproof connectors or weatherproof DMX cables. I'm trying to see if between the different domes, the different outdoor moving heads, if those, basically the screw or the waterproof connector portion is different before I start carrying them. So I'm working with Miner on that to check out a handful of different ones so we can hopefully have a solution for that. Does that answer your question, or still a little fuzzy?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So for the first connection in the chain, what I did is I ran one of the cables that we carry, and then it goes from the indoor DMX to indoor DMX, and it basically got converted to outdoor. But in that connector, I added a little bit of the dielectric grease to make sure it stays waterproof. And then I did end up throwing some tape on it because I knew that we were going to get some storms over that 4th of July show. Didn't have any issues. Everything worked perfect. So that worked for that solution. It was up for about 2 weeks or so, and it rained quite a bit, and I didn't have any issues. Might be a little different for winter or a long season like Halloween into Christmas. So I'll do a post on that if I run into an issue.
I know those DMX connectors have been around for decades. They're pretty resilient.
When you were doing the slow pan and tilt in the little sequence that you showed us,
Mhm.
did you put an effect on that, or did you keep it? Did you do that manually with that?
You can do it either way. So let me go back to Xlights real quick. So with pan or tilt or really dimmers, really any of them, you can use an effect like bars or single strand, and they will control your moving heads. So you can see they are still moving with this bars effect here. They're going back and forth. If I change this to single strand, let's see. So with this single strand, they're kind of going left to right and there's kind of going up and down. If I wanted this to go to like pan to kind of go left to right. So now you can see they are moving kind of left to right. Obviously you'd have to play with the timing to make it look right or to really do what you're trying to do. But that would save you from having to go through and do all these effects on DMX, where if you wanted to do it at DMX, you can adjust them right here by individually adjusting the channels, or by clicking this little half circle arrow, you can create a value curve. So you could create a ramp. You could do a ramp up and down. You could do sawtooth or sine wave. You know, there's all these different value curves that you could use to really create the effect you're looking for. So if I wanted to go from, say, facing the crowd to facing the left, you know, I could do something like that. And then to make it a little easier, so now they're all starting at facing the crowd and then going to the left. If I wanted, say, 3 and 4 to do something a little different, now they are going the opposite direction. So they start at the middle, and because I click this invert button, 3 and 4 are going to the right, even though I have the same value curve. So you get a lot of flexibility with Xlights to be able to play with these types of things. It really kind of depends on my mood or what I'm trying to accomplish, whether or not I'm using DMX values or trying to use single strand or bars or something. The value curves work pretty well, but if you're trying to do, let's see, like if you wanted it to do an effect where, you know, it starts on the left and ends on the right, but is moving, doing something like this with the value curve would be harder to accomplish than doing it with a single strand. So getting it to start at 1, 2, 3, 4, getting that timing is going to be a lot harder to do doing DMX first. Once you add a single strand or something, you know, you could do something like this where, okay, the single strand kind of got you in the ballpark, and then you just zoom in. And now you're using DMX, but the single strand kind of got you the pattern you were looking for. But now you have a little bit more precise control. One thing that single strand does occasionally is if you set that to like 2 or let's see. So here's a good example. So you can see with single strand at node 1, it skips node 1, starts at node 2, but node 2 and node 3 are not the same length. Node 4 is different, node 5, like none of these are exactly the same, even though it's one cycle. And as you play with like the chase size, it changes a little bit, but that type of thing would tend to bug me. If you're trying to create a nice pattern, if one is longer than the other, it's going to ruin that pattern. So there are some downfalls depending on what the effect is with single strand. A left to right is pretty symmetrical, but a bounce tends to throw that off.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Kyle, quick question.
Sure.
If I remember on your presentation or your PowerPoint, you said that yours needed domes.
Yes.
Have you tried both dome versus non-dome and for cold climate shows?
I have not. I have heard from people that live in cold climates that outdoor ones wouldn't be a great option. I live in a cold climate, so I went with the domes. One of the contributing factors for me was speed and the fact that if the bottom of the moving head base is going to be exposed to the weather, and if we get like freezing rain or something like that, I've heard that the base can freeze. And as soon as you power on the moving heads, they try to do like a self-test where they spin around and make sure they can move in every direction. And if that's frozen, it could break the motors or break something in the moving head. And I didn't want to have to deal with that. They do make like warming beds and things like that, but those don't only work while the moving heads are on. So that's not helping you unless you leave your moving head on all the time.
Gotcha.
So, I was weighing that option as well. I don't want the moving head on all the time, but the warming bed would only be beneficial if that kicked on before the head kicked on, because if they kick on at the same time, it's still doing that spin. And if it's already frozen, that bed isn't helping.
Interesting. And I've looked at both, and I mean, you're in Michigan, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
Utah,
yep.
same thing where it's cold here. So, but then I've looked at like even Tom's,
Mhm.
Magical, like they're not graded even with the dome to be in that cold of temperature.
Yeah, I talked to Tom and Miner, and I also talked to David at Horn Christmas Lighting.
The Dominators.
Yep. So I talked to Matto, JR. So I talked to a ton of different people about which domes or, which moving heads would work. Tom and Miner, basically all of them told me that the website shows that they're not rated for that, but they have customers in those climates with no problems. So
Gotcha.
I kind of took a leap of faith, kind of an expensive leap of faith, but Tom assured me that they would be fine. Miner assured me that I wouldn't have any issues. I was really going back and forth between Miner's and Tom's. They're virtually a similar moving head, I think. I don't have Tom's to verify that, but from what I've read, they're similar. But I got a little better of a deal on them from Miner than I got from Tom. So
That's fair. But they're not LED.
Neither of them are LED. They're both
Okay. I know
a
Tom,
lamp
okay.
based.
I heard Miner's developing an LED, but that might be not public knowledge either yet.
Yeah, I've seen LED ones. The ones I've seen that were LED, I was not very impressed with.
You have to go, I think it was like 7 times more powerful bulb or something. It's something ratio that I forgot, but it had to be a
Gotcha.
lot more just to even be at the same tier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Got another couple minutes. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. If anyone else has any questions, come on up. There's a couple other things that I forgot that I want to make sure that I mention before I forget. When you're setting up moving heads, you want to make sure you are avoiding your neighbor's windows. These things are incredibly bright. They can cause a fire. They are a nuisance, all that type of stuff. So if you are blasting them into your neighbor's windows, that is going to be a quick way to cause a headache for your show. You know, they're going to call the city. They're going to try to get you shut down. So make sure you do your due diligence. If you find that, you know, just for argument's sake, the value to clear all my neighbors' windows at my house is 43 on the tilt. If I go below 43, I'm hitting somebody's window. So I made sure all of our sequences, the lowest tilt value is at least 43. That way it is clearing my neighbor's roof line, not hitting any windows. I don't have to worry about it. I know lots of people make jokes that, you know, I'll just buy a moving head and shine it on the neighbor that complains to shut down my show and, you know, all that type of stuff. But at that point, they're probably going to win in the argument with the city that you're being a nuisance or, you know, disruptive and that type of thing. So I would strongly recommend avoiding that. When I first set these up for that 4th of July show, and I was on my roof turning them on and the values weren't all correct. Like I definitely blasted some of my neighbors' houses. I went up to them, let them know. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. You know, I was testing this. I worked out all the kinks. Won't happen again. You know, they're all adjusted now, so you don't have to deal with that every night. And most of them just laugh. They're like, yeah, I thought a spaceship was landing or something. It was ridiculous. Like, I had no idea what was going on. Like, yeah, apologize and, you know, let them know that, you know, it was an accident and I took care of it so it doesn't happen again. So, you know, try to do the right thing with that. Spend the first couple nights after you get your moving head set up. And what you can do is in Xlights, I'll show one other thing real quick. So for like the tilt here, you know, you could add a value of say 43. And then you could have that basically be an additive value or the minimum value. And then you can just kind of play around with the different options here.
Last week at the SoCal Mini, Gil demoed the new you know, the thing that he's working on, and I don't know if it's in here now, but there's limits.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's in this version or it's in the upcoming one, but there's limits that you can put in. So no matter what you do, it's your safety. It won't go beyond the limit.
Yeah, that's in the new model that he's coming out with. So it's not out yet, but that will be super helpful and something I definitely recommend everyone kind of take advantage of. But this would just kind of be like a kind of a fail safe. You can change these values or the way they are additive. It basically just adds that little buffer. So, you know, say it starts at 20, added a value of 40. Now everything's going to be at 60. So now you're well over all your neighbors' roofs. So you can kind of play around with the values to figure out what works well for your show. You know, everyone's location's different. If yours are sitting on your driveway as opposed to your roof, you're going to need a different value than what I would have or need. So kind of up to you guys on your location and things like that, but that should at least get you in the ballpark. No, all right. Well, looks like we got a couple minutes left, but I don't know. Is James still in here? Did you still have that question from earlier about the Fable machines?
Yeah, I am. I was just basically, you had mentioned earlier on that the color channels were able to be put into sort of one unit, and then you could control the color with the Xlights effects. And I was just kind of curious. I think I may have either missed when you were talking about that, or you just went so fast that I didn't catch all of it. So that's all.
Okay, sure. Give me 1 second. So what you can do is when you look at the manual, it'll tell you what the channels are. And for the Fable F4, it is channels 5 through 7. So it's a 15 channel model. What I did is basically I made a model for channels 1 through 4. I skipped 5, 6, and 7, and then I made 8 through 15. So 5 through 7 are the lights. So when you come over to the controller and you go to like actually upload your output, let's make that just a little smaller. So basically it goes 1 through 4, 5 through 7, 8 and 9 for the Fable machine, 1 through 4, 5 through 7, and then 8 through 15. So it's basically just daisy chaining, kind of going right in line. But instead of you having to go into your DMX effects, so the LED color macro is another way you can control the colors on the Fable F4. I have no idea what 63 is off the top of my head. Like I'd have to go look that up and figure out, is that red or green? Where if I do this model, how it's broken apart with lights, I can throw an on effect here. I could set that to green. Now the lights on my Fable machine are going to be green and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to try to figure out what the DMX value is to get to green. You know, say I want a darker green, or say the house is using, let me pull up a better example of this. Give me just 1 second. I know I'm almost out of time, so I don't want to go over, but so this is, oh, that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna run out of time to do this, but if you have the lights added to like an all group or something like that, when you do like a pinwheel or you do something on your house, it'll translate over to this DMX 5 through 7 channel and automatically fill it in and light it up, as opposed to you having to come in and add a DMX effect and then try to pick the exact right color. I did that my first year trying to match the colors. You know, it took me hours and hours and hours and hours to try to get each individual little one. And then I came up with, well, if I just throw a RGB effect on it, on a color, on a pixel, and I set that to the correct channels, that'll take all the guesswork out of it. So that's what I ended up doing. It worked great and cut down hours and hours of sequencing time.
Nice. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.